Well, we come to our final study in the final episode of this drama in the flood, and well, we come to Genesis chapter 9, but I'd like us to flick over to Genesis chapter 8 just briefly, and if we look at verse 3 and we look at verse 5, we'll see there that the waters returned and decreased continually. So clearly here we've got light penetrating the water, and the winds and the spirit, the ruach of God, is assuaging the water, and we've got a separating of waters here in chapter 8, where the fresh waters are drawn up to heaven, leaving the languishing waters to lie beneath. And well, we've seen this before, haven't we? In Key Stage 2 terms, this is the process of evaporation, isn't it? This is what's happening here, but we've seen this before. This is what happened in the very opening section of the entire biblical narrative. This is Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 to 8. This is the second day of creation happening as Noah comes out of the ark. We remember what happened in the second day of creation. The Spirit came upon the waters, and the waters were drawn up to heavens, leaving the deathly waters to lie beneath. You know, if we were to look at creation and we were to inspect the text of it, you'd see that time and time again, God says it was good, it was good, it was good. But when it came to the second day, which happens to be the day of the drawing up of the waters, you will not find that statement attached to the second day. God never said that the second day was good. And maybe, brothers and sisters, the reason for that was when those fresh waters were drawn up to the heavens in the great expanse and the deathly waters were stored up in the earth, maybe, brothers and sisters, it wasn't good because God knew that those waters were to be torrents upon the earth. That would happen in Genesis chapter 7. Maybe he said they weren't good because he knew that those waters would flood the earth. And brothers and sisters, that wasn't good. But I think there's more to it than that. Because what we do know now is that waters represent people. When we come to Genesis 1 and we see verse 2, we notice that the earth at that point was without form and void. It was chaos. And you've got that eerie phrase, the waters covered the face of the deep. And those waters prophetically speak of oceans. Chaos, brothers and sisters, inhabits the Gentile earth. But through the divine process of God, he has separated two groups of people, and he categorizes those people as waters. You've got those of the heavenly waters, and then you've got those of the earthly waters. I mean, Isaiah 65 verse 17 explains to us profoundly and poignantly that God wants to purify a political heaven in the future. He wants to form a new heaven. In other words, Yahweh wants everybody to be part of the heavenlies. And if he's talking about the heavenlies, he's talking about the political heavens, and he's talking about the waters of the heavens. And we know this, brothers and sisters, because when we come to the end of the story, and we open up Revelation chapter 21, in which the hymn we just sang in unison together, we see New Jerusalem. And we find out in the glory of eternity, there is no more sea. And if there's no more sea, then there's no more Gentiles. And if there's no more Gentiles, then there's no more nations. And if there's no more nations, there's no more people. And if there's no more people, there's no more flesh. And if there's no more flesh, death and fear shall be wiped away. That's the eternal process. And the kingdom is a precursor of what is to come. It's all pointing to the moment where Yahweh is all in all, as the waters once covered the face of the deep. And so the process we see here in Genesis chapter 8, which is this scientific process of evaporation, which happens in the natural, well, what we find is, and I'm going to term this is trademarked Swanic 2024. We're calling it the water cycle of redemption. So what's going to happen in the natural is going to take process in the spiritual, because of course we have the Sea of Nations that began with the great flood of AD 70, and for 2,000 years the times of the Gentiles have trodden upon Jerusalem. But God's majesty and his handiwork and his divinity and all of his mercy has been drawing up nations and people from those waters, sanctified in the purity of God. And we come out of the dross and the filth and the mire of the earth, and we rise up sanctified by the light of Christ, who is the Son of righteousness. The figure of baptism as we come out of them. What do they form, brothers and sisters? When the vapor of the earth, the vapor of the seas, condenses in the heavens, what do they form? They form clouds. And clouds, I believe, hold water, don't they? And Hebrews 12 verse 1 tells us that we are all a cloud of witnesses. And a cloud is tightly compact together with millions and millions of tiny little water droplets, all holding on to the word. And that's what we're doing, brothers and sisters. We're just holding on to the word, ready for it to precipitate. And that's what clouds tend to do, especially if you live in Wales. Clouds precipitate. They pour water. I'm glad my wife smiled at that one. And that's what's going to happen, brothers and sisters. And this draws into motion, well, the great cloud of witnesses just prior to the end of the times of the Gentiles, where Jesus in the Olivet prophecy, he talks about, as in the days of Noah, get into the ark, he proclaims to them, and then he brings them to the moment we're considering this morning. He brings them to Matthew 24 verse 30. The Son of Man will come in the clouds of heaven, in power and great glory. The clouds of the saints. And he's brought them from the dross and the filth of the nations of the earth, and he's proclaiming them into the future. A flood is coming. But the clouds will prove the end of it. He's taking them through the water cycle of redemption in the Olivet prophecy. And all the things are here, all the conditions are perfect to trigger something spectacular. A rainbow. The water of the God's word pouring upon the earth. As Deuteronomy 32 says, I will pour my righteous doctrine, the light of Yeshua, and the cloud of the saints together in power and great glory, bringing upon this earth something so majestic and beautiful that the earth shakes in its light. And it all comes together, brothers and sisters, in the book of Revelation and chapter 10, when we see the rainbow angel. So let's go there, please, to Revelation chapter 10. I saw a mighty angel, verse 1, come down from heaven. Notice here, clothed with the cloud. Here is the image of the saints, the multitudinous saints. And a rainbow was upon his head, and his face as the sun. This is Malachi 4 verse 2. Jesus, the Son of Righteousness, spelt S-U-N, with healing in his beams. And he's going to blaze his light upon the saints of the cloud, in which they hold the doctrine of the word, the water of the word. And then Matthew 13 verse 43 comes into play, where Jesus says that the righteous shall shine like a cloud, bringing forth the sun. And in this moment, as the cloud appears, as the sun rises, as the new day dawns, light refracts, scattering light across the saints, showing the spectrum of Yeshua's glory and his character. It's a phenomenon, a splendid one, isn't it? And what we begin to realize in the very colors of light refracted, we begin to realize that we are going to shine Jesus' colour, in which we begin with Adam, red, and we end as the king clothed in purple. We become his light. We are the ones who are to present his beauty and his wonder to the earth. You know, we know Galatians 3 and verse 27 tells us that we are now clothed in his righteousness through the waters of baptism. But what's remarkable is in verse 1 of Revelation chapter 10, in the future, it is Jesus who is clothed by us. We become his waters. We're his wedding garment. We clothe him as he once clothed us. And yet what we see in verse 1, his feet are a pillar of fire. We've got here the saints in their militant manifestation. This is the saints bringing upon judgment upon those Gentile nations who have opposed the land of Israel. And now the saints with Jesus together come in a militant form. And well, if you look at verse 2, it's clear that this military conquest has been finalized. You look at verse 2, his right foot is upon the sea. And if his right foot is upon the sea, brothers and sisters, that means he's conquered the beast of the sea. And his left foot is upon the earth. And if his left foot is upon the earth, that means he's now conquered the beast of the earth. This is Ephesians 1 verse 22, where all things are now put upon his feet. And if he's conquered the beast of the earth and he's conquered the beast of the sea, then Armageddon is in distant memory. This here, what we see in Revelation chapter 10, is Christ and the saints in dominion on the earth. As the rainbow. Brothers and sisters, if you notice in verse 3 and 4, the seven thunders have proclaimed their voices. And we remember, don't we, in our first session, we went to Psalm 29, and we looked at the flood and Jesus on the throne over the flood. And in Psalm 29, we see 7 campaigns over the Gentile nations. It's accomplished here because the 7 voices have uttered their thunders. And brothers and sisters, we call this the march of the rainbow angel, but he's not marching. Verse 5. He's standing. The angel has conquered. And it leaves me to realize that after the great storms of judgment in Ezekiel 38, and the pressing down of the European groups, that at this stage, after those storm clouds have diminished, in the gentle showers of his word, only then is the rainbow seen. And it all begins in the great episode of Genesis chapter 8. So if you just turn now to where we left off yesterday. The door was sealed in Genesis 7. That we might just suggest was Michael who shut the door. And, well, now the door that was once sealed upon the ark is now going to be opened. And Revelation chapter 1 and verse 18 explains to us there that it's going to be Yeshua, it's going to be Jesus, the Messiah, who's now going to open the door of the tomb because he's got the keys of Sheol in his hands. And he's knocking, it says, urgently in Revelation. He's knocking at the door, ready for the seal to be opened, in which now the multitude can come out. And while we're going to see this episode in Genesis 8, in John 11, we remember, don't we, there was a moment prior to his crucifixion, which accumulated to his death, that he went outside one of his greatest friends' tombs. And that tomb was inhabited by a dead man. And Jesus felt the toll of this because it tells us that he groaned and he wept as he walked with the crowd to the sealed up tomb. And it says that he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." Like an obeying child in verse 48. it says that he that was dead came forth. In other words, Lazarus heard his name being called beyond the grave. The voice and the cry of Jesus will break the bonds of the grave, and even the sound will penetrate death, as he that was dead came forth. And if we notice in verse 16, in the chapter that we're in, a voice was called. And notice the phrase, come forth out of the ark. Well, I believe that's John 11, verse 43. And this isn't one man, this is a multitude. Because you'll notice in verse 18, we've got the same phrase again. They that were in the ark came forth. It tells us there who did come out the ark, by the way, if you look at your margin. What's the description? In verse 19. The multitude. Families came out of that ark. In Genesis chapter 8. Multitudes upon multitudes of these animals come out of the ark as they hear the voice. And we know in John 5 and verse 28 that the hour comes where graves shall hear his voice. And in verse 19 we have a figure of Lazarus, but now on a grandeur scale as all the multitudes come out of their ark. Not just the dead, brothers and sisters, not just the dead in the ark of the tombs, but the living in the ark of their ecclesias are going to come out together. It tells us in 1 Thessalonians 4 that the dead and the living shall be caught together in the clouds to meet him. This is a simultaneous event. Together to meet him in the clouds. And the clouds, of course, speak of the saints. And in verse 17, the animals now surge forward, fur, feathers, scales, all marching, speaking of people. But what's remarkable is in Genesis chapter 8, we actually don't see the door open, do we? It's not there. We know that the door was shut in Genesis 7, but the door that was open is not unveiled to us in the climax of the story of Noah. We've got to go to Revelation chapter 4 to see that door open. So, brothers and sisters, if you will, let's open the door of Revelation 4. And you'll notice the door of time is now going to open. And now in this particular portion of Revelation, we're now invited into a world that goes beyond the resurrection, that goes beyond judgment, that goes beyond the downtreading of the Gentiles. This now, in the door of Revelation 4, is the opening of a new political order in which it's established upon Jerusalem. And let's remind ourselves of the great eternal covenant in which we saw the beasts come out in the figure of that rainbow. We remember this. We have Noah, of course, who represents the man. We have the birds, the fowl that speak of the eagle, and the livestock that speak of the ox, and the beast there pointing to the lion. But may I suggest that we have characteristic traits within these four beasts that just so happen to be the faces of the cherubim, because Noah, the man, would be the priest, of course, in which we have the characteristics of compassion and mercy to others. The eagle points to the prophet, in which we lift others with spiritual insights. The livestock, the ox, the trait of bearing responsibility in the service of the work. And the king, leaders of truth in our future ministry. And what we begin to realize is that the divine characteristic traits that we are to inhibit are all about how we deal with people. How we spiritually deal with people, leading them, showing words of compassion to them, lifting them up when they're feeling down, bearing the responsibility of the service. It's how we deal with each other. And that's what's marked in the faces of the cherubim. And although we see the four beasts here in Genesis chapter 9, what's fascinating is that in Revelation 4 and verse 7, as you've got in your Bibles open, have you noticed that those same four beasts are there? Right there in Genesis 9, as the door of the ark opens, we're now invited into the opening of the four beasts of Revelation chapter 4. They're all there, brothers and sisters, but you'll notice as well in verse 4, not only the beasts there, but we've got 24 elders sat upon the throne. Well, clearly, the 24 elders take us back to 1 Chronicles 24, where we see the 24 orders of the priests in the Davidic ruling. And so these 24 elders is a symbolic number for the future priesthood. So we've got a future priesthood here with the cherubim. But notice, they're wearing crowns. So if we've got a future priesthood and they're wearing crowns, this means we have a royal priesthood. These are king's priests that we see here in verse 4 of Revelation chapter 4. And you know what? The story of Noah has a numbering. We remember as those animals marched into the ark, they were all numbered, weren't they? Well, the lion, of course, which represents the unclean animal, the beast, they went in by twos because they were unclean. The ox, being a clean animal, they went in by sevens. The eagle, the flying fowls, they were ordered to fly in by sevens. And of course, we have man, in which 8 souls were saved. And if you do your maths, then you'll come up to the number 24. 24, brothers and sisters, they're all numbered divinely because it's the divine characteristics of the future saints. It's all part of the same story, an emblematic pointer to the royal priesthood yet to come, who all bear the markings of the cherubim together. You'll notice in the throne of Revelation chapter 4 that there is a one sitting upon it. This is Jesus upon the throne in Revelation chapter 4 and verse 2. And if he sat upon the throne in Revelation 4 verse 2, well, that leads us to be reminded that he's throning himself upon the waters of the Gentiles in Psalm 29. He sits here in Revelation chapter 4 upon the seas of the Gentiles. And he's not walking on them like he was in Matthew. This time he sat upon them. He's in dominion. In Psalm 8 and verse 6, it says he's got dominion under his feet. And if he's got dominion under his feet, it means he's absolutely in control of the Gentile seas. And how do we know he's in control of the Gentile seas? Well, we only have to look at verse 6 of Revelation 4. What is the description of the sea? It's a sea of glass, like unto crystal. There's divine order here. The seas and the waves do not roar. They're as clear as glass and as still as crystal. And where's he ruling? Where's the throne? Where is the throne we see here in Revelation 4? This is the throne of Zion. This is in Jerusalem. This is the new political order in the heavens in Jerusalem. In fact, the very verse we went to in Isaiah 54, where it speaks of the waters of Noah, is pointing to the moment in Revelation 4. The waters of Noah, brothers and sisters, are no more. No are more. They're gone. And enveloped upon this throne, in verse 3, to sign the inscription of the order, is a rainbow with the cherubim, all in which are numbered 24. Beyond the door of the ark is the Davidic government ruling the nations. And the symbol is the spectacle in the sky. Light refracted. And you know what? Another man saw the same thing. It's Noah, isn't it? Let's have a little look back at Genesis chapter 9. Noah saw the same thing. Verse 11, I will establish my covenant. And incidentally, the word covenant there is used 7 times in Genesis chapter 9. I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off anymore by the waters of Noah, the waters of the flood. Mabul is the Hebrew that's used in Psalm 29. Neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And if there's no more flood to destroy the earth, that means there's no more Gentiles to destroy the earth. And if there's no more Gentiles to destroy the earth, that means Israel now is going to be the sole rulership of the earth. The land is revealed. No more will the Gentile nations down tread Jerusalem. It's over. It's quelled. It's subdued. Brothers and sisters, Jesus isn't bringing the flood. He's subduing it. We see that here in Genesis chapter 9. And the sign of his covenant, the inscription, the signature in the sky. This is the Yahweh's signature. And there we see in verse 13, it's the rainbow. Now the word bow there that you see in verse 13 is a militant archer's bow. It's used for an archer. Here in verse 13. But we know it's a rainbow. And what we begin to realize that the rainbow is actually a weapon. And it's God's weapon that he has provided for the saints. Isaiah 42 verse 13 tells us that there's going to be the saints who's known as the mighty multitudinous man of war. And the mighty multitudinous man of war is given the rainbow as the weapon to quell and subdue the seas. But notice here, the rainbow is pointing up. Clearly, see the bow in the sky. And we know that those rainbows point up. And if they're pointing up, then this means that God is unarmed. The weapon is no longer in use. He's placed it to the side. And if he's placed it to the side, then that means the Gentile floods have been quelled. And if the Gentile floods have been quelled, that means the thwart of him trying to destroy Jerusalem has been stopped. What we have left in the subduing of the flood is a miracle, a marvel in the sky. And God says in Genesis 9 verse 16, in this dazzling rainbow, it speaks of his everlasting covenant. And well, I didn't know this, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. But rainbows are full circles. Who knew that? Well, I feel rather silly. Rainbows are full circles. It's the earth that prevents you from seeing its eternal purpose, isn't it? The earth is stopping the rainbow from completing its full eternal purpose. And so in this earth today, we only see a portion of God's purpose. We see the top half of it, which is through the water of God's word. To see the other half, brothers and sisters, requires faith. Faith in the eternal purpose of God's work. And what we do see is God's covenant arms coming down upon earth, giving it a nice warm hug. Because that's what he's doing in that rainbow. His arms are arching down to earth because he so loved the world that he gave his son. And the arms of the rainbow will always reach from east to west because, of course, they follow the direction of the sun. I think Psalm 103 has a lot to say about that. That God's mercy is as far from the east to the west. And even in that psalm alone, that speaks of eternity. And the reason is, if I stood here and started walking north, presumably that is north, eventually I'd end up walking south. But if I started here and started to walk west, I would never ever walk east. Because east to west is eternity. And God's mercy is eternity from the east to the west, as it follows the light in the sky, as it shines in the cloud of witnesses, as the nations are quelled, and Jerusalem now is victorious. Noah saw the kingdom of God on earth. That's what he saw. He saw the future multitude and the throne with the one sitting upon it. In Luke 21, verse 25, where the seas and the nations roared, while Noah, a man of rest, saw those seas and nations subdued and calm in tranquility and in song. It tells us right this from the beginning. We don't have to look at Noah to begin to realize that God has a purpose with the Gentile nations, because we know in Genesis chapter 1 that he called the seas sea. They were waters, but he called them the seas. And in verse 10 it says that he gathered together the seas. Gathered the seas together. And I have no idea again why the translators translated verse 10 of Genesis 1 as gathered. It doesn't mean gathered, it's the Hebrew word mikthar. Anyone who knows a little bit of Hebrew would know that that word means hope. He gathered the seas in hope. In Genesis 1 verse 10. And that same word is used in Jeremiah 17, in which Jeremiah says, Mikvah Yisrael. The hope of Israel is for the Gentile seas. And he's told us in Genesis 1 verse 10, the hope of the gathering, the hope of Israel is the earth. The hope of the seas is the earth. I don't think that Noah was the only man who saw it. I really don't. And if you disagree with me, brothers and sisters, we shall remain in fellowship. As I think there was another man who saw this moment. Another man who was a man of rest. Another man who was going to provide an ark of salvation. Another man who was the man of the covenant. Another man who was to call out retribution upon the wicked generation. Another man who was baptized by the waters of death. Another man who rose out of those waters. Another man who called the multitude into the ark. Another man called Jesus. I think Jesus saw this moment in Matthew chapter 17. Here is now one of the greatest moments in history. You know, we've got Peter, James, and John, and they're going to witness now their leader, their master, their Messiah, their king. They're going to watch him go through a metamorphosis. They're going to witness the spectacle of human turning into glory. This is in Matthew chapter 17, and the transfiguration took place around 6 months prior to his crucifixion. And what we begin to realize in Matthew 17 is that the tide now is beginning to turn against him. The people are beginning to discredit him. And worst of all, his own disciples begin to doubt him. And now in Matthew 17, Jesus in Caesarea Philippi is around the same time. He's starting to feel the pressure. He's bearing the curse of humanity. And we are now in a time of crisis for Christ. And in this moment, as the entire earth, its future and its past, bore upon his shoulders, the Father in heaven presented to him the joy that was set before him. In Matthew 17. And who's he with? Well, he's with, in verse 3, a man called Moses. Moses, a man who, of course, was put into an ark, who led an exodus out of the Gentile seas into the land. But he's not alone with Moses, is he? You'll see also in verse 3, he's with another man called Elijah. Elijah, of course, is going to lead the future exodus of the dove of Israel back to the ark, leading them through Gentile waters. And we're not told in Matthew, but we're told in Luke 9 and verse 31, the conversation they were having. They were talking about the exodus of Jesus Christ. And the word we've got in the King James is the word decease. And the decease of Jesus is Luke chapter 12, the baptism of his death, in which he would lead a multitude through waters. And it seems to me, brothers and sisters, that the entire conversation that took place on that fateful night on the Mount of Transfiguration happens to be a great good portion of the entire Noahic story, leading people through an ark, the waters of death, into the future, and only concludes once the dove of Israel returns to the ark. It's the story of Noah, isn't it? The conversation they were having, amongst other things, of course. But we see in Matthew chapter 17 and verse 1 to 2, in this great time of crisis for Jesus, that on a mountain he was transfigured before them, and his face did shine like the sun, and his raiment was white as light. Behold, verse 5, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, "This is my beloved Son." Now, we're reading in the Greek, aren't we, in the New Testament? But, well, the word voice in the Hebrew is most often translated as thunder. And may I suggest that the voice that echoed out of this cloud was the voice of thunder. "Behold, my Son." And notice the ingredients of this spectacle. We have light, we have clouds, and we have a voice. And we've seen all those before, haven't we? Where else have we seen a cloud, a voice, and light? Well, it's where we began in Revelation chapter 10. These are the same elements that we saw in the angel. And what we begin to realize, brothers and sisters, if we look at the golden tapestry and the golden thread, as we link the episodes of the multitudinous Christ together, as we start in Genesis, as we're then taken to Ezekiel chapter 1, as we're brought to the Transfiguration, and we end in Revelation chapter 10, we see the same language presented amongst all of these stories. It's the same event told 4 times in different ways. If you look at verse 5 of Matthew chapter 17, it says that the bright cloud overshadowed them. And the word bright there is the word in the Greek that's photon. And we've moved up from Key Stage 2 science, we're now on GCSE science. Because this word photon is the word that's used for light. This cloud was filled with light. And what do clouds contain? Well, clouds contain tiny little microscopic water droplets as vapor. And this water vapor, this cloud, was filled with light. And we're talking, brothers and sisters, we're not talking about a lamp. We're talking about divine Shekinah glory in Matthew chapter 17. But it doesn't just say that, brothers and sisters. It says this bright, luminous cloud overshadowed them. And the word overshadowed, I had to have a little look. It essentially means a mist that enveloped them in a haze of brilliance. And notice, it is he who is wrapped around the cloud. Jesus is wrapped around tiny, sparkling water droplets like clothing. And I think in Revelation chapter 17, the conditions are perfect, aren't they? They're absolutely perfect to trigger a spectacle. What do you think Ezekiel chapter 1 and Revelation 10 and Genesis 9 are compelling us to see? The Mount of Transfiguration in the haze of brilliance, into the cloud that is filled of light. What is always, brothers and sisters, seen in the clouds? A rainbow. At the Mount of Transfiguration, he's not just with Elijah, he's not just with Moses, but he's with his bride. And doesn't she look radiant? He's with us, brothers and sisters. In a great time of crisis, he's with us. You know, we ask the question, in his resurrection, does he appear in glory? Did Jesus appear in glory when he rose out of the tomb? No, he didn't, did he? But yet we're told in 1 Corinthians 11 that the woman was formed to be the glory of her husband. In other words, only when he's with his cloud of witnesses do they both shine together. And in that shining, they present the rainbow. And I find it rather moving that in this wonderful moment in history, at the great time of crisis, where the entire history and future of the earth bore upon his shoulders, the Father in heaven presented the glory set before him. That was you and I with him in the kingdom. We became the comfort of Jesus in his moment of crisis. The transfiguration wasn't just, I don't believe, about the death. And I use that sensitively. It wasn't just speaking about the death of Jesus. It was talking about his triumph over the world. The eternal covenant, says Genesis 9, a covenant for perpetual generations. And you know what? When he was at the Mount of Transfiguration and he saw this moment, have a guess who he's going to recall time and time again prior to his crucifixion. Who became the inspiration of Jesus in his moment of his mission? It becomes the story of Noah, amongst other things, of course, brothers and sisters. But Noah is there. The signature of him is there prior to his execution. We became the inspiration for Jesus in the story of the great tapestry of Noah. And I think this entire episode goes beyond the kingdom age. That door of time opened beyond it. Let's finally turn to Revelation chapter 21, which was the hymn we sang together. Revelation 21. We've got new heaven and a new earth. And this is the moment in which death and sin and tears are no more. It's all removed. And look at verse 1. Here is the moment we began. There is no more sea. No more Gentiles. No more people. No more flesh. You know, throughout the sessions we've been having together, we've actually taken a tour. We've been sailors around 3 different types of seas. We started together in the flood of the Gentiles. That became the turbulent, troubled Gentile sea of Isaiah 57 verse 20. We've then witnessed yesterday with the dove and the flood that was quelled, the calm seas of the kingdom age, which is in Revelation 4 and verse 6, the sea of glass of tranquility. And now we're on dry land. Because now in Revelation 21, we have the removal of the sea entirely. This is the immortal earth, immortal Israel. It's a time where, Habakkuk 2, verse 14, that the glory of Yahweh will fill the earth as the waters covered the sea. Notice it's in the past tense. And coming down is New Jerusalem, a metaphor for deathless earth, in which there is a population of glory. And you'll notice in verse 19 to 20 in Revelation 21 that there are 12 foundation stones that are the heart of New Jerusalem. These are people manifested in stones. 12 great precious gemstones. You know, in modern times, with modern technology, we now can create pure light using laser technology. It's amazing, isn't it? You can create the purest form of light. And geologists, just for the fun of it, have taken gemstones and shone pure light through them just to see what happens. And what they found was an entirely new characteristic altogether that we never knew before prior to this invention of laser technology. And one of two things happens with gemstones. You shine pure light through one type of gemstone and they'll turn black like charcoal. They'll just absorb all the light entirely. You'll never guess, brothers and sisters, but diamonds are that characteristic. The most expensive jewel on planet Earth turns black in pure light. These type of gemstones are called isotropic gems. And that's the characteristic for them. But the other type of gemstone is called anisotropic, and these gemstones change entirely when you shine pure light through them. In fact, what geologists have found, that if you shine pure light through anisotropic gems, they change their colour and their patterns completely. And what they begin to realize is that they all shine the colours of the rainbow. Every spectrum of light is found in an anisotropic gem. And you'll never have a guess what gemstones New Jerusalem is founded upon. What would you like them to be? Well, if you look on the screen, every single one is anisotropic, which means they appear more beautiful in pure light. The colours of the rainbow in Revelation chapter 21, because after all, Genesis 9 is a covenant for all generations, a perpetual covenant for eternity. And we'll finish as I read the words of Genesis chapter 9 and verse 16. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant. You know, we're not the only ones, are we? We all look at a rainbow and we go, wow, a rainbow. We're not the only ones who look at them. Because here, Yahweh does. He observes them. And I would imagine at every moment of every day, in every month, in every year, in every week, there's always a rainbow showing on planet Earth. And if that's the case, he's always looking at them, and he's always observing them. The angels now are looking at rainbows, thinking about that eternal covenant. And when the angels see those rainbows, they're not seeing what we see. They see you and I in the future with his Son. They see the bride, a cloud of witnesses, all refracting the eminence of his glory, diverse in colour, but when we come together, we provide the backdrop in which his Son is seen, the light of the world.